Hey everyone, this is Mark Treichel with another episode of With Flying Colors. I'm excited today to be speaking with Ray Ragan, and we're going to talk a lot about AI and its implications for credit unions. Ray, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mark. I'm really happy to be on your show. I've been listening now for almost 2 years in my role as a former interim CEO and back into my role as CIO. There's a lot of things that you're covering in your show that has been of interest, and candidly, it's really the absence of regulatory guidance that caused me to reach out and say, "Hey, Mark, would you be interested in talking a little bit about this path to bringing AI into a credit union beyond the LOS, beyond fraud, and actually started using it as a strategic tool."
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about AI because I try and dabble in it just to. I've got a good friend who's in his 70s who always is on the front end of different technology things, and I've seen that it's kept him young. So I'm looking at these AI things as a way to tap into what's coming, but also stay educated, but also to kind of keep that brain fresh. So, and Ray, I want to, you've got an interesting background. I'm going to read through your
Thank you.
bio that I saw here on CU Insight. And again, thanks for reaching out so we could do this. But you're currently the CIO of Securityplus, Federal Credit Union in Baltimore. You bring extensive experience from the defense and financial technology sectors, specializing in implementing machine learning, intelligence systems, and speech analytics at enterprise scale. You have a master's degree in admin from Northern Arizona University and studied strategy and risk at Stanford and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College.
That's right.
You're a credentialed project manager, professional PMP, and hold several agile certifications. And thank you for your service, by the way. A combat veteran and decorated U.S. Army officer, Ray formerly served with the 75th Innovation Command's National Capital Regional Team, where he focused on AI-enabled human detection and computer vision. He's also a serial entrepreneur and holds a patent in AI and computer vision technology designed to improve customer experience and NPS. Ray, I'm excited to chat with you today about this, but seriously, thank you for your service and all that entailed. I really appreciate that side of this
Well,
too.
yeah, and it's funny, Mark. As a Army Reserve officer, it really gave me an opportunity to get to see some of those applications of AI way beyond what we're thinking about in the financial institution space. You mentioned in there the whole application about computer vision. Well, I actually filed another patent after that was issued, that blurb came out, and I have another patent pending for check fraud, and that's all computer vision based. And so, it really has opened up a real realm of opportunity for novel applications of AI. And as you heard me mention before, I really have been looking to the NCUA and the federal agencies to push out good, meaty guidance of how do we as a federally insured financial institution go and implement AI beyond what our vendors are offering, and start thinking about it as a strategic partner. And one of the things I like to talk about with credit union leaders is, have you considered how AI can actually augment or even add additional capabilities to your management team? And many of them, they're still thinking about fraud, they're still thinking about LOSs, and it hasn't even occurred to them that they could feed in their strategic plan into these AI large language models and get challenging insights and observations that you couldn't do unless you actually had some sort of business analyst or somebody doing the deep analytics to gain those insights for you. And this is exactly what really excites me, and why I'm excited to be on your show and talk about some of these regulatory concerns, because I think the lack of guidance has really created a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt within the credit union space, particularly at the board and management level. And so, not getting that signal that all the water's fine, folks have been, have been reluctant to go forward. And so that's why I really have been championing this model of how do you bring AI into a credit union.
Well, and it's interesting too, the Trump administration has edicts out there that came out real quick at the beginning of the administration about, you need to get rid of X number of regulations before you consider one. You need to hold back on guidance. Well, the theory of this administration and a lot of the folks appointed to the Supreme Court is that, there's the Federal Credit Union Act, for example, there's regulations, and guidance is further and further away from an actual rule,
Right.
and it's guidance, and is it binding? And NCUA, in your roles, you've seen where NCUA will say, well, this is safety and soundness driven, and it's tied to this letter to credit unions, like third party due diligence, or pick or their priority letter that comes out. And there's a general almost reticence to issue those things right now because it's not something that the administration necessarily wants. And Chairman Houtman, he talks about the concept of being supportive of AI and that NCUA is dipping their toe into it. They did a briefing at their last board meeting, I believe, and
That's right.
it was it there, but there wasn't a lot of, you'll probably know more than me, but my take from that briefing was they kind of dipped their toe in and didn't really say much of anything. They said they use it for like balancing their 5300 data that comes in. They're contemplating looking at it possibly about, the fraud side of it. But he does set the tone that he wants the industry to know that he's generally supportive of it. But that doesn't mean that you're going to know how the examiners are going to deal with it when they come in, because everybody, even when there is guidance, you have a bell curve of how NCUA deals with it. You've got the good, the bad, and the ugly of that. And life is a bell curve, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody kind of looks at it a little different. But if there isn't the guidance, that kind of makes it a little bit more Wild West. Maybe is that kind of what you're sensing
Yeah,
there?
that's exactly it. And in my uniformed capacity, I've been invited in some of these, high level federal agency, the sausage being made on AI policy. And it was interesting under the Biden administration, a lot of that sausage being made was actually very in the interest of prove that it's safe before we'll give you the go ahead with AI. And under the Trump administration, we've definitely have seen that flip, and now it's much more, hey, go ahead and start implementing it. And we have to step back and consider what's happening globally. And we've got the European model and we have the Chinese model, and the Chinese have gone all in on AI. They have taken all the safeguards and all the safety rails off, whereas Europe, on the other hand, has done the prove that it's safe model. And as part of that recent NCUA meeting, they reviewed the executive order, and let me pull it up just so I'm speaking correctly. It's the executive order 14179, removing barriers to American leadership in artificial intelligence. And as part of that briefing, they were talking about these things that are paramount within the Trump administration. And so we, as folks trying to interpret the tea leaves, we're stepping back and saying, okay, so where do we think this is really going to reasonably lead us? And I think what we're going to see as reasonable outcomes out of this is we're going to see likely our examiners to be a little bit more open to it. And when I have talked to the NCUA examiners about it, they said, yes, we acknowledge that we haven't published guidance on this. What we're recommending is that credit unions embrace the NIST AI risk management framework, which, it's a good starting place. And, and so obviously, a lot of credit unions are interested in going into AI and going beyond what their vendors are packaging to them and start integrating it into their actual operations, integrating it to their management, integrating it into their strategy. And so, that because there's such a big gap there between what we know how to do as credit union management versus what the NCUA is asking us to do, and that's embrace that NIST AI risk management framework, I've gone as far as starting to offer a free AI workshop to management and boards just to help them understand, all the work that needs to be put into place to be reasonably aligned with that NIST AI risk management framework, because it's kind of a big lift. And unless a leader has been through a previous Malcolm Baldrige Award or a ISO certification. These are things that we don't typically do within the credit union space. And so that's the reason why, I really wanted to offer this workshop to help those credit union leaders and their boards say, okay, we're going to be brave, we're going to be bold. We think the NCUA is going to let us embrace this. So how do we do this with sufficient safeness and soundness for our depositors and our membership? And so that's really where we're at. And I know that was a very long response, but
No,
this
that's
is
good.
there's a lot of nuance going on right now.
Well, and your timing's good as far as the seminars that you're offering out there because it's that time of year, right? It's NCUA is going to be looking at their strategic plan. Credit unions, if they haven't just gathered, they're going to gather in the fall for, and start defining what 2026 and beyond brings. So, it's really a ripe season for taking some of that on. So let's talk a little bit about the that offering that you're having. What would the if you had to give the top X number of topics that you'll be without going into a deep dive and actually doing the presentation here, but
Yeah.
what would what would the if someone signed up for that, what would their expectations be of
Yeah.
what would the major topics would be?
Yeah, so I offer it in a couple different formats. One is kind of a more of a shortened format where it's delivered in just 1 hour. And really, what I talk about there is what a credit union would need to do to reasonably align with that NIST AI risk management framework. And really, what it boils down to, Mark, is having that board approved policy. But that sounds really easy. But there's it's the iceberg, right? There's
Right.
so much work that goes on in order to get that policy ready for the board to be considered. And, it comes down to a comprehensive risk assessment within the credit union. It requires review of their data governance and how they're handling their data classification and how the credit union intends to use that data and what they consider to be that public, that internal, and that confidential and restricted levels of data. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, AI it's almost like bringing someone onto your management team. And we can sign those NDAs with consultants. Obviously, as employees and management members, we have that duty to protect confidential information. But these large language models, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, or Cloud, or whatever your favorite one is, they don't have that duty. And so, it takes that board approved policy, that deliberate risk assessment for a credit union to be able to start using those tools. And so, that's kind of my short. And then, the longer is, I get into some of the tools and techniques about how you can really leverage, Chat GPT and that family of tools for broader management purposes. That's conducting market research, expansion and merger opportunities, those types of things. Because I always like to point out that if you go and use ChatGPT, it's like talking to somebody that has a PhD in everything. And if you talk to somebody with a PhD in everything, it's they're going to give you very good advice, but it's not going to be really directed to what your purposes are. And so, I talk about those techniques of setting the persona, setting the constraints, and in when you're actually working with ChatGPT or Gemini or again your tool of choice. And because those types of techniques really help the large language models produce very accurate and actionable insights that if you just asked it, hey, would you would you review my strategic plan and make a recommendation? It's not going to be very good. But if you do the priming, if you and you know, there's this whole joke in AI, is AI engineering a real thing? I would actually go. I would actually argue in the realm of, yeah, I think it is. And so in that longer workshop, that 4 hour workshop, we get into the much more, hey, this is how you would actually use to solve a management problem, a strategic or operational management problem, much beyond just using this as a fraud detection or an automated attendant in your call center, because that's where like the bigger ahas start happening. And we haven't even talked about agentic AI yet, and that's a whole nother realm, and I'm excited to talk about that a little bit more later.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and as we're talking through this, and I'm thinking about when I've dipped my toe into the AI world, it reminds me of the quote: "If you ask the wrong question, you're going to get the wrong answer." And the prompts help you get a better answer. And one thing that I've also stuck on in my head on AI is it's like having it's like having a team of researchers, of summer interns that can gather some information for you. But when I have looked at it at something where let's say I personally have a college level so I have a degree in accounting. If I was to ask it an accounting type question, I can be more precise in my question because I know enough going in, right?
Yeah.
If I was to start asking questions about how can I build a kayak that will hold water and not sink, right? Which I know nothing about. If I ask that type of question, I'm more likely to get a wrong answer and get misled, it seems, from what I've been experiencing. And so, any general thoughts on that statement and agree, disagree?
Well, absolutely agree. And the one thing I always like to point out to anybody that said, "Hey, I asked ChatGPT and it gave me a wrong answer." Yeah, they certainly can. But the thing I always like to point out is the large language models we're using today are the worst ones you will use your
Right.
entire
Sure.
professional career.
Right.
And so they're only going to continue to get better. So this is where that prompt engineering that really starts coming in. If you're going to ask it that question about the kayak, you should preface it as, "Hey, you are a seasoned carpenter who's been creating artisanal kayaks, for the last 20 years." And it's funny because like you wouldn't think like that kind of persona setting before you start having your engagement with the AI is really that important, but it is. And the way I like to look at it is think about it as, as a seasoned professional, if you get just asked a general question, you're going to give a general answer. But if somebody says, "Hey, Mark, I'm studying for my CPA, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are uh, about this kind of amateurization under the gap rules," and you're going to give a much better
Right. Right.
response than, "Yeah, you just need to make sure your balance sheet looks good."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, and another thing as you're talking about, using it beyond the normal things like the call center or the fraud
right.
detection. When I was at NCUA, organizationally, and it's not just NCUA, but you have this office, and they're responsible. The Office of Examination is responsible for the exam program. You have the Office of General Counsel, who writes legal opinions and regulations. You have the regional directors and their teams who do the exams. You have the HR director. You have the security people, and they all have their roles and responsibilities, and they all have the world that they live in. And but there's a bit of a stovepipe mentality
Hmm.
where I know what I know, and he knows what he knows, and she knows what she knows. And you get together and you do this strategic planning, and you try, you have the wisdom of crowds, you bring all those people to the table. But there's this wealth of data and information, as opposed to bringing their brains to the table. You have all this plethora of data that you could also, under the large language models, bring to make make a better decision. But have I hit on a theme there that it's that if you embrace this, it's kind of like having that wisdom of crowds and breaking
Yeah.
down some of those stovepipes to improve your end result and then your end performance, etc.
You're exactly right, Mark. And this goes back to the fact that yeah, it can give you wrong responses. And so, that's where having, that experience, that know-how to be able to ask it the tough follow-on questions. And I generally speaking, most of the AI systems out there right now are very sycophantic, and you'll upload your strategic plan, and if you haven't primed it to begin with, it's going to say, "Oh, this is a great strategic plan. It's sure to drive your credit union to your goals." And but if you preface it, if you say, "Hey, ChatGPT, you are a seasoned credit union consultant that have been working for 20 years. You're working in this market. I'm in the Baltimore market, and consider my strategic plan for all the issues that I may have overlooked." And it's going to give you a much better response than if you just said, "Hey, look at my strategic plan and let me know if it's good." It's going to be like, "Oh yeah, it's great." And it's just these models are out of the box. They're sycophantic. When you're a senior member of management, you don't want sycophantic answers. You don't want a yes man. You want somebody that's going to really challenge your thinking and challenge your insights. And so, that's part of that duty of, if you are going to use those tools, and this is again, stuff that you'd be covering in what the management has agreed to use AI for, and what the board has authorized, and those controls in place. And I talk a lot about ethical AI, and I boiled it down to four principles. One is that it's disclosed. Two, it's consensual. Three, it actually adds something to the human condition. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is that it's human accountable. And if you as a credit union leader are going to use AI as defined by the board approved policy, ultimately you've got to be responsible for the output that it gives. And because and I think this is the fear of policymakers, is that at some point in the future, a member of management is going to say, "Oh, AI did that." That's, as we saw with Sarbanes-Oxley, that's not an okay answer anymore.
Right.
And so that, if you're accepting that accountability, that human accountability, I think that's going to be one of those things that really goes a long way. And you mentioned earlier about the bell curve, and some things are going to be okay with this region's examiner, and some things are not going to be okay with that region's examiner. And it'll be interesting as the community practice continues to grow. It's so new, and just
Yeah.
nope, yeah, and it's just it's very hard.
When I think about starting at the policy, and I think about, ERM and board governance at credit unions, and some of the conversations I've had with credit unions, you'll have situations where the credit union has a strategic plan that says we're going to do A, B, and C.
Right.
And then it's a 5-year plan, it's a 3-year plan, and then in the middle of that timeline, they get an opportunity to buy a bank or take on a merger of a like-sized institution, but it wasn't in the strategic plan. And then they go down that path, they end up contemplating wanting to do it, and then NCUA comes in on the back end and says, "We didn't see this in your strategic plan." Big, and it's a big initiative.
Yeah.
What was the And then that's followed by, was the board involved? What did the board know? When did they know it? And
Yeah.
you need to document that more. And so I can see in my mind the evolution wherever when there does come to be some guidance, there's going to be talking about the board governance side of it and the policy, and the NIST framework needs to have A, B, and C and D in it. But I can envision, as they start to understand it, and it gets more vetted out, this example of, well, the AI made me do it, and then NCUA back and saying, you didn't have a policy, or your policy said you would do it this way and you did it
Yeah.
that way. So yeah, it's kind of the Wild West of exploring the West, right? And all that it entails, but putting up some frameworks, I could see why, that's a great first starting point of how you're going to do it, what you're going to use it for. What's the human intervention, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who signs off on it? Because you can't say Claude did it. You can't say ChatGPT did it. That won't get
But
you out of jail.
yeah, and that's exactly it, Mark, is, so long as your policy has that human accountability, that's the key part, right? Because, again, I like to think of it as, imagine hiring a really smart consultant. Ultimately, when she comes in and makes these recommendations, it's ultimately the board, or it's ultimately the management that's accepting that consultant's recommendations. It's very similar with AI. I mean, obviously, we talked about some of the confidentiality and some of those other considerations that come with using AI, and I would never advocate putting sensitive member information into any one of these large language models. That would be, I think that would be a blatant violation of safeguarding member information. But can you obfuscate that data? Can you aggregate it? Yeah, I think you probably could. But again, this is where the board needs to be informed. They need to understand how management plans to use it, and then the management needs to use it the way that they said. And this is the thing about good governance is, you say what you do and you do what you say, and so long as you stay within in those guide rails, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Agentic AI. Did I say that right?
You did, yeah. Well, it's funny, because this is one of those terms that none of us heard until about 6 months ago, and when it was first coming out, and even as a person that works in AI, and I literally code in AI on the weekends, or code on AI. I used to say it as AI that has agency, just because it was such a turn of phrase. And you heard me allude to it a little bit
Right.
earlier, and what's what's happening with agentic AI, and both Google and Amazon now have agentic AI workflows. And you may have seen, I think it was last week, Wells Fargo announced that they were actually going to roll out agentic AI to their workforce. And so, we're familiar with ChatGPT, and imagine ChatGPT if it had the ability to go and do things. And so, the example I like to use is, so I'm a credit union marketer, and I create an agentic workflow that goes and looks at what are the popular themes in Reddit, Instagram, and TikTok for certain topics. And actually, the agentic AI then allows me to pre-program to the large language model the personas, the constraints, and the considerations of bringing that data back from Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit, making recommendations to me as the credit union marketer of, these are some areas that might resonate really well for this week in the credit union's positioning. And this is all stuff that would have taken a human to go and read all the posts and everything, and come back with these recommendations. It's hours of work, and now it can happen almost instantaneously. And it comes back into that large language model that is actually looking at the data it gets based on your rules and the persona you set for, and actually create outcomes from it. It could, if you allowed it, it could automatically post to your credit union's Facebook, Instagram feeds of what it came out with. It could also give you those insights on market opportunities. Hey, based on what I saw, there are opportunities for this kind of product. Stable coins, the hot thing right now, right? And so it could say, hey, if you ran a promo right now highlighting some kind of stable coin affiliation, it's likely to get a substantial amount of virality. And this is a very flat case for agentic AI. And what I like to say is, that imagine bringing that into your credit union's back office, and having the ability to look at applications and make decisions based off of it, and then send off that information to the next step. And when I say the next step, it's the next information system. So it's the next database, the next LOS. And the idea is that you're saving your humans for those times when it is important to have that human to care. And this is one of those themes that I always drive home, is that you should be caring with your humans and scaling with technology. And a lot of times in credit unions, we get that backwards, and we try to scale with our humans and then care with the technology, and that's completely opposite of what it
Yeah,
should be.
yeah, that's
And just agentic AI is going to really open that up.
well, yeah, that's a powerful statement, and you've touched on the agentic AI. You've touched on the classes that you offer and what you include in that. What else should have I asked you here today about all of this that we want to make sure the listeners can hear today?
Yeah, so Mark, again, I'm very grateful for this time. I deeply respect the content you cover on this show, and I appreciate what you're doing in terms of helping us credit union management understand the murky waters that that are our industry. And really what it comes down to is that, hey, we understand, we as the collective industry, and forgive me for using that, understand that the guidance we're getting from our regulators is not super clear, and we really do need to embrace AI. You heard me talk about Wells Fargo rolling out agentic AI to their entire workforce. We're already trying to compete at that level, and those margins are going to continue to be compressed, and it's going to continue. We're going to continue to find difficulty in scaling and staying competitive with the market leaders. And certainly, go ahead, Mark.
Well, and I was just going to say, an earlier thing you said kind of ties back to this is the youth of our planet are going to be more comfortable today with AI, and the leaders of every industry needs to be embracing it because that it is the future. And oh, by the way, credit unions sometimes can be challenged by bringing the young folks into the credit unions, right? So it's perfectly aligned with, when you talk Reddit and you talk Instagram and Facebook and all those social medias and AI and being able to utilize that to make it to enhance your marketing, to be able to bring a better mix of members. One of your articles talks about AI and merger, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that soundbite and what that means to you.
Sure. So, Mark, I led off the last article with, yes, AI will merge your credit union. And while that sounds very inflammatory, it's true. And what I mean by that is that there are going to be the financial institutions that do figure out how to embrace AI, how to operationalize it, how to offer hyper personalized journeys and discussions with their members that they truly feel valued, and return to that credit union. And then there are going to be the credit unions that don't figure it out and continue to try to compete just entirely off the goodwill and spirit of the people in the credit union. And while that's a very noble way to continue the fight, it's not a sustainable one. And so that's really the thesis of that article, is that either you figure out AI and you're able to compete, or AI is going to be used by the credit union that you're merging with.
Sure. And avoiding the challenge of the regulator not having clear guidance avoids that challenge with the regulator. Meanwhile, you're getting further behind on where the future is heading.
It absolutely is, and this is where, and this is why I'm offering these free workshops, is because I understand the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we have in our industry, but we can't wait for guidance. So we need to take the best guidance we have. which is, follow the NIST AI risk management framework and learn through doing of what AI can do for your membership.
Great point. And so on the opportunities to sign up for these classes, if someone wants to take you up on that, or they just want to chat with you about this topic in general, what's the best way for them to connect with you, Ray?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So they're free to email me at ray.ragan@securityplusfcu.org, or they're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Both ways work. Again, I'm offering this as free because I really believe that it's critical for credit unions to embrace this now, not 3 years from now, but now.
No, makes total sense. This is you learned you taught me a few things. I think some of my listeners probably learned a few things, and I encourage you to reach out to Ray if this sounds like something that you'd want to educate your board with, educate your management team with. Ray, I want to thank you for reaching out to me. We've been
Yes, sir.
connected on LinkedIn for a while, but I appreciate you reaching out so that we could talk about this important topic today.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. And listeners, I want to thank you as always for listening. I hope you will listen again soon. This is Mark Treichel signing off with flying colors.